Hi, it's Mark Bossert, producer of the Car Truth podcast, and we're here with Bernie Pollock of Pollock Automotive in Vancouver, and we're talking about the environmental impact of cars. How are you doing, Bernie?
Doing well. It's a big subject.
This is a huge subject as we've noodled around this and kind of danced and had some intense moments actually talking about it. I guess it's spurred by me reading an article that by the World Economic Council, so generally recognized as safe study that, because there's a lot of controversy about studies, but this one basically said that there's over 20,000 deaths from auto pollution in the United States every year, which is more than all traffic accidents, people lost in wars that year, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a pretty dramatic statement that car pollution, the environmental impact of cars and transportation is really high. So where do we go with that, Bernie?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned 20,000 people because I think that's probably a lot less than there was historically. I mean, cars are a lot cleaner than they used to be. And I think we were going to take a little snapshot and look at the way cars used to be, say, well, let's have a look at the 1950s when, cars had no pollution equipment whatsoever. Cars were, becoming used by everyone. Previous to that, there wasn't one in every home, but in the 1950s, pretty well, at least in North America, everyone had one in their home. And, but the pollution that came out the tailpipe was just hideous. And in many other ways, there was road draft tubes. So there was emissions coming from the combustion chamber of the engines. And it didn't take too long, especially in larger cities like LA to realize, there's the smog and people couldn't see where they were going because of the pollutants that were coming out of the car. So, over time, we've done a really good job of reducing those. We haven't done a good job with carbon dioxide. And I guess we'll just talk a little bit more about the 50s and what was going on then.
Well, I think you mentioned that the cleanup of cars is also, it doesn't just apply to the car, it applies to like servicing vehicles. Like, let's talk about some of the fluids that are used in vehicles.
Absolutely. I mean, so oil changes, of course, have been a big part of cars. And in any car, unless it's an electric car, needs oil changes. So, back again, when we go back, back a few decades, cars needed oil changes every 3,000 miles, 5,000 kilometers, and probably even more back in the 50s. I mean, I wasn't actually alive back then, so I'm assuming they probably needed a little more, but again, where did this oil go? I mean, some of it was just, dumped in dumped out in the back of people's farmyards or down rivers. Soon things got cleaned up in that department. But we fast forward to modern cars. A lot of them, you don't need to change the oil till every 20,000 kilometers. So there's a huge change there. So there's a massive reduction in pollution of oil. Other fluids,
air conditioning, yeah.
Yeah, antifreeze, engine coolant. Again, this was a kind of thing where you would service it once or twice a year. It would break down, and people would and a lot of people were do-it-yourselfers, so they'd be flushing their cooling systems at home with their garden hose and just sending the antifreeze down the river. Well, again, we've tightened that up, and a lot of modern antifreezes, they have a lifespan of like 5 or more years. So a cooling system flush, again, is something that we don't do very often anymore. Other fluids, there's transmission fluids and just things like gaskets on cars were not as good as they are nowadays. So cars would leak a lot more oil on the road. Tires wouldn't last as long. I mean, now you can get tires that last 100,000 kilometers. Back then, 20,000 Ks was probably I'm guessing a good amount of lifespan for tires. So just a lot, the technology of cars is just, we drive more, there's more cars, but they're per unit way less polluting than they used to be.
What about things like air conditioning?
Well, air conditioning is an interesting story. So again, if we take the 1950s, not very many cars had air conditioning. The only cars you'd probably find would be a Cadillac or a Lincoln or some, luxury car. But nowadays, every car has air conditioning. I mean, it's standard equipment. The difference, as air conditioning got more popular, it used to use Freon R12, which was a fantastic refrigerant, worked really well. All of our refrigerators had them. The R12 was even so good, it used to be used in the aerosol cans. I think people have forgotten about that. But back around a few decades ago, it was realized through some studies that the ozone layer in the Earth was being depleted. There were big holes, and R12 refrigerant was basically the main cause of it. So we got together as a society, and we actually did something about it. We actually created a new refrigerant. R134A is the common automotive refrigerant. There's different ones used in industrial applications, but they don't damage the ozone layer. And that's made a huge difference. So we were actually able to turn that around. Now, I believe there's still a hole in the ozone layer, but it keeps lessening over time. So that's a good success story.
What about things like brakes and paint?
Yeah, so automotive paint, again, and again, this is kind of like paralleled the paints we put on our homes. I mean, all paint used to be lead-based, because it actually, lead-based paint does a really good job. Unfortunately, lead screws our brains up. And actually, there's one thing we didn't actually talk about is gasoline. That, cars used to use leaded gasoline, and again, that causes brain damage. I'm amazed. I mean, you and I grew up with leaded gasoline, and it was sort of out of the picture, I guess, when we're probably in our late teens or 20s. But
it explains a lot.
Sorry.
It explains a lot.
Well, it affects young people's brains more than anything. So I mean, and it's funny how people thought, no, we got to keep leaded gasoline. It's good. And of course, if you own a lead manufacturing business, you don't want your business to go downhill. So we're just so self-interested as human beings to keep our own products. But anyway, people fought against leaded gasoline. You know what? We just changed it, took it out, made a few modifications to engines, and it's all good. And people aren't suffering from lead poisoning. Anyways, back to car paint. So I mean, everything used to be lead-based, oil-based. And that slowly changed about maybe 15 years ago. I remember I knew someone who owned a body shop, and they were like into this environmental waterborne paint, and it was like, that was unique for cars. And now every auto body shop uses it. I mean, it's pretty much like lead paint is extremely difficult to buy if you even want it. So we've changed that. What other fluids were we talking about, Mark?
What about brakes?
Brakes, yeah. So car brakes, again, brakes have a frictional material that wears, and brakes, asbestos is a fantastic material to use in brake pads. Unfortunately, it creates very bad lung diseases in human beings. So it was identified as being bad, and asbestos was removed from brake pads, or so we thought. And I'll say a little more about this. But generally in the mainstream, of automotive braking for the last 20 or 25 years, there's been no asbestos in brake pads. But other materials have been used, like copper. And I never really thought about it until I read an article in certain jurisdictions are banning copper from brake pads because it creates pollution in waterways and kills fish. And I don't know. It's funny how I can be in this business, or we can just go about doing our daily business and not really think of the environmental consequences of things. So copper is a good material apparently for using in brake pads, but not good for a fish environment. So again, things will be changing in the brake pad world. But I was thinking about asbestos just as a little note. Apparently, it came to my attention a little while ago that there are manufacturers in Asian countries with less stringent laws that are actually, making brake pads with asbestos and, shipping them around. So you got to be careful where you buy your car parts if you happen to be one of those kind of people who do it yourself. Or, I mean, if you buy it from a reputable place with a reputable name, you should be fine, but, a reputable manufacturer. But if you're buying some white box cheapo pads, you might be using asbestos.
Which is bad.
But yeah, it's bad. And the weird thing is, apparently like mesothelioma, I think that's a disease you get from asbestos. It just happens all of a sudden. And, it kind of freaks me out because, I used to do brakes with asbestos and my lungs are healthy and I'm good. But apparently it'll kind of hit you at like 50 or 60 or 70 years old. And all of a sudden, you're done. So, I guess say a little prayer that I, didn't breathe too much of that stuff in, but. And fortunately, they stopped using it at a while ago.
So what about the materials that are actually being used to manufacture cars? There's pretty drastic changes in not just the moving from steel to aluminum in some vehicles, but also changing from aluminum parts to plastic parts. Maybe just do a comparison about those.
Yeah. I mean, steel used to be an enormous part of a car. I remember had a customer that he brought in a 1960 International pickup truck, and I just sat in the dash of this vehicle, and I'm looking around, and everything's like the dash is steel, and like everything is steel. I go, this is like the ultimate time to be in the steel industry in the United States, because it's like everything was steel, but slowly, there's just more and more aluminum, being used as a lighter weight material. And then of course, plastic has been used. I mean, it's a huge weight saver. Plus you can mold plastic into a variety of different shapes. So by being able to mold plastic, we've been able to create intake manifolds that flow air a certain way, and it improves efficiency. But the thing, to me, the downside of plastic, of course, is the production process. Plus, it doesn't last as long as a lot of metal components. So you end up replacing parts more often. So, while it might save money on fuel because you've got a lighter car, you're ending up wasting energy because you've got to replace a part prematurely. So there's always I don't know. There's the math involved. I don't know if we're better off, but the machine, the car runs more efficiently with certainly with a lot of plastic materials, and aluminum is being used more and more in cars again for lightweight. I mean, the Ford F-150 pickup truck for the last couple of years has used a lot of aluminum in the frame and lightened the truck substantially.
To a lot of controversy, actually.
Yeah. Now, I mean, one thing aluminum's got going for it is it's a very recyclable metal. So and it's got a lot of value that way. So that's a positive thing about aluminum. But to fix aluminum requires a lot of retooling in shops, and I would say it'll probably result in more vehicles being written off at a younger age than it would in the era of steel. So what's the environmental price of that? We're burning a little more fuel to run a steel car, but if the vehicle gets written off, then you have to build another one. So again, there's studies around. There's good PhD thesis material and all this stuff.
And then, of course, we're moving really rapidly into the future of electric cars, and it's being legislated, at least whether it's electric, whether it's hydrogen. We can talk about that, but there's definitely in the EU, there's rules that all cars are going to be in the future very soon, in the next 10 or 15 years anyways, that there will be zero pollution will be the only acceptable level of outgassing from a vehicle. So as we move into electric cars, what's the environmental impact of an electric car?
Well, the electric car, I mean, of course, it's less. I mean, the immediate environmental impact is you're not spewing pollutants out into the air. So the immediate impact to me is like, you're going to have a quieter, cleaner city, wherever cars are running, it's quieter, it's cleaner. I mean, imagine a world with no more, I mean, it's kind of neat having those sounds, but there'll be a world of like the noise pollution levels will be way down. There's no more gas coming out of the back of a car. Now the environmental impact, of course, on electric cars, where's the energy come from? We know all the dirty nasties about fossil fuel. Where's the energy come from for an electric car? It's got to come from somewhere. So probably solar panel and wind is going to be the cleanest. But there's lots of other sources. I mean, dirty coal would be the worst. But somewhere along the line, I think the net benefit to the air is going to be much better having electric cars. Electric cars do currently take more energy to build, by the way, than a gasoline-powered car, but it's reduced over time. With the lower emissions that are being put out the tailpipe, it doesn't take too long to reverse the math on that. So I think if you have an electric car and you keep it for a long time, the environmental impact of that will be minimized. The longer you keep the car, the better it'll be. And an electric car will really be, I think, something, once they get things down, really worth keeping as opposed to disposing of, as we often do with our internal combustion engine cars.
Well, yeah, and you add things in like over-the-air updates, or those things where you can really literally reprogram the car at a certain level to become a new, better car.
Yeah.
That extends the life of it.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
cars and
so,
buses. I think one point that we wanted to make was buses. Buses actually pollute. Buses and garbage trucks and any of the big vehicles that we have that are starting and stopping a lot during the day pollute more than all the cars put together. And that's something
yeah.
that I don't think is talked about a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, the impact of those vehicles will be even higher. And, you know, if you have cities that have a lot of train, you know, I think of like somewhere like, I mean, we have a bit of rapid transit train, but it's not much compared to somewhere like London where you can go everywhere on trains. So I was in Chicago. I mean, you can go a lot of places on trains there, but you know, like the impact of those vehicles is even higher as a percentage when you have less cars and more, you know, people moving on clean items, you know, like electric powered trains. So, you know, the positive thing is that all that emission equipment that we've installed on cars has been installed on buses as well. So, I mean, I remember, you know, when I was a kid, some of the buses, I mean, the smoke, the smell of the pollutants that came out of it was horrible. But the thing about, you know, internal combustion engines, no matter how good and clean we make them, they're still pumping out carbon dioxide. I mean, as a matter of fact, the more efficient you make it, the more carbon dioxide comes out. It's kind of a product of you know, of efficient combustion. The whole formula of it is basically water. When you burn a hydrocarbon fuel, it's water and carbon dioxide is really what really comes out at the end.
So they've become a carbon dioxide pump, as you've mentioned to me.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a very efficient carbon dioxide pump, carbon dioxide generator. So.
Which is awfully scary, since that causes that's a tremendous cause of pollution.
Yeah.
We don't do well in a carbon dioxide environment.
No, exactly. Yeah. A little bit, no problem. But, you know, again, I mean, we could get into this a little more, but, you know, as we cut down more forests, those are the, you know, the vegetation is kind of the sink that I mean, they like our carbon dioxide, but, you know, if we keep cutting them down, then they can't absorb the carbon dioxide. So it's all, there's an ecosystem at play. Yeah.
So the future looks better, but there's a lot of things to navigate. There's the changing in jobs that's going to happen because of that. There's the changing in you know, people's perception of, you know, how much enjoyment can I have, how much personal freedom am I allowed to have.
Yeah,
you know, I want to have a dirty, stinky, pollution control removed diesel because that's my right. And eventually, I think that right's going to be taken away.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
You know what? I mean, it'll probably just disappear naturally over time, or the amount out there will be so few that it won't really matter.
It'll be frowned on, like smoking kind of is.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be you know, like it used to be, if a car was driving down the road and blowing a bit of blue smoke, that wasn't an abnormal thing. Nowadays, if you see a car smoking, it's like it's a weird thing, you know, and it's kind of like it's not really socially acceptable anymore. So I think over time it'll just disappear. And you know, for the odd, I mean, when you think about how many, you know, like those neat 1960s hot rods that we all love, you know, I mean, there's not very many of those cars around. You don't see them very often. You can sure smell them when they drive by, though. You know, they'll just be rare. I mean, who knows? Like, and I'm thinking like deep in the future, 50 years from now, will you even be able to buy gasoline? Who knows? But, you know, it'll probably be so expensive that, you know, you'll only want to drive that car on, you know, for a 50-mile drive, and that'll be kind of it. So I mean, in over time, everything will just work its way out. And I think one interesting parallel, you know, I've mentioned to you a couple of times, you know, it's like steam train locomotives versus diesel electrics. You know, there was a time when steam locomotives were like the ultimate machine to pull trains across the world, you know, and they did a good job. I mean, they had a lot of power. The downside is they weren't a very efficient machine. They created a lot of pollution, and actually a lot of cities legislated steam engines not to be used in cities, and they actually forced, you know, railroad companies to use electric powered trains because the pollution was so high. But you know, I mean, things change, and the diesel electric, as much as a steam locomotive, if you ever see one, is a beautiful piece of machinery. It's just not that efficient. And diesel electric, as soon as they came along, you know, one or two people can operate the locomotive, whereas a steam locomotive took 7 crew of 7 people to maintain it and run it, and they have to stop every 100 miles to add water. And the diesel, they just go, and they just keep getting better and better. And I think this is the kind of change we're on with cars. We're going from the internal combustion engine, like the steam locomotive, to electric cars, which are like they're not going to need service very often. They're just going to keep on going, and less pollution, more efficiency. It's just kind of exciting, scary at the same time for those of us in the industry, but our hands may not get quite as dirty as they used to.
Well, there'll be other issues. I'm sure there'll be battery issues that you'll have to solve, and it'll be the car industry will become, outside of the suspension and braking systems and body control issues, whatever, has morphed into being a lot more of an electronics expert, dealing with the computers, reprogramming, flashing stuff, diagnosing electrical systems. I mean, we've had conversations about that. I mean, I trained in that business, to be a electronic technologist, and you diagnose it the way I would diagnose a circuit.
Yeah.
So it's really cool.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited about it. It's, to me, what's always neat with cars, I go, what's going to go wrong with this thing next? Because I just like fixing them, So I'm always going, okay, what's going to go wrong with these things? And it's interesting because there's some internal combustion engine cars that are like really reliable, like almost nothing goes wrong. Like I'm thinking, like, I remember doing a service on a Toyota Corolla that was like, had like 250,000 kilometers. So we get like a 1990s like a 2000s model, like 250,000 kilometers. I look under the car, not a drip of oil anywhere. I'm going, this is like amazing. Like there's not even an oil leak to fix on this thing. The car just keeps on going. So, there'll be electric cars like that too, where like nothing will need to be done. And then there'll be other like issues where something will happen, I mean, who knows, it's, it's like, it's funny. Some manufacturers just do stuff worse than others. Like some cars are just problematic and some are just really reliable. And I don't want to point any fingers or make any comments, but there'll be stuff that just happens because it's not made as well as it could be.
That's how human beings operate.
Yeah.
And we seem to always be trying to make things better, which is, I think, probably our saving grace.
Yeah, it is. I think it's kind of exciting. As we did some work on electric smart car a couple of days ago, and it's just kind of cool. Like, I look at this motor, I go, wow, it just makes a lot of sense. I mean, you just got this little round cylindrical thing, and instead of all those pistons and moving parts. I mean, I'm totally impressed with what we've done with the internal combustion engine. I mean, how efficient it is and how well it works compared to what it used to be like. But, it's like, I mean, this is just way better. The electric, it's just like, it just makes more sense.
So there we are. The future's coming, whether we like it or not. And we just really want to thank you for listening to our ramblings here on the Car Truth Show. And thank you, Bernie.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for listening.